So my first question, really to start off in general, is having worked in the data industry for 27 years, the word big data comes along, and I'm a bit cynical about it because it's kind of doing more of what we've been doing in the past. And I'd like a perspective from Mark as to what he thinks is really new about big data and maybe the perspective on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think from what Damien said earlier around big data and whether it's a buzzword, and it's really oversimplifying things quite a bit. Yeah. I mean, from the Facebook perspective, I think particularly the velocity of how much data is generated has got a lot greater over the last few years. Like you say, things like credit card data, mobile phone data have been around for years. And it feels like it's now the tools and the software and the technology are catching up to be able to do a lot more with that data in a more reasonable amount of time, let's say. It's still a need for analysts and that analytical set on top of the data to make sense of it and to be able to do things with it and make decisions based on it, which is really important. I mean, looking at Facebook, I think there's both the consumer side. I think there's a stat which is at any one time there's 1,500 different stories that could make their way into someone's newsfeed, and it's about that filtering of that into the most relevant content, which is a challenge which wouldn't have existed even 10 years ago. Right. And from a consumer perspective, it's that expectation of that being the case, whereas that just wasn't the case years ago. Okay,
and obviously you as one of the best practice players, your company's been mentioned a couple of times. When I read from a white paper by IBM that roughly 0.5% of data is used usefully, in a best practice environment, what percentage of data do you think should be used usefully? Is there an answer to that?
That's a good question. I think it's using the right decision to make the data to make the best decisions you can, whatever the percentage that is.
Okay, so really the percentage is irrelevant. So if we actually criticize the industry for not doing 100%, that's perfectly valid, actually. I mean, it's
I don't think it would ever be 100%.
I think there's a few points with that as well. Is that there's about data that becomes actionable and insightful for targeting or for refining campaign for building strategy. Yeah. There's then data that are signals that can inform that strategy, but can't be applied all the way through to targeting. Okay. Personal identifier information, all of those considerations. There's then also the ability to just keep analysing data down and down until you actually are analysing down to too small a subset. Okay. I think. Yeah. So the real answer to the question is working out what is the effective filter for you or your business. Okay. Where is there enough both data, insight and volume to make correct decisions? And then the huge exponential growth in volume, like 90% of the world's data is created in the last 2 years, I think, according to IDC. There's so much data that you also have to be able to filter those bits that maybe aren't going to be significant in the short term. Okay. And then there are a lot of things around social marketing, email marketing, customer feedback, face-to-face contact, which is feedback as a gift, which you do then have to ingest, and you have to respond to, and you have to engage the consumer in the conversation at that point. Just like to your point earlier, right? That it becomes less any of us as advertisers or technologies to that brand. It becomes us with that consumer, bringing that message all the way through.
And based on what you just said, can you give an example of a best practice player in that arena?
I'd love to be flippant and say no. So it's a UK example, but actually I think one of the companies I think do a really effective job is Sky, across a whole range of media. My specialist areas is in a section of that programmatic trading of media, and they're really harnessing the data that comes out of that, matching it with their back-end, back-office data to create really small but still sizable and effective enough targetable segments. Starting to drive time of day, day of week, regional messaging, and then combinations of messaging based on the order of products purchased. So they've done some great case studies. I recommend you use Bing, just to compete with Damon earlier, to look at some of those case studies. But actually, there is some really good examples of data being used to drive really intelligent marketing back.
Okay. Yeah. Eric, what's your view on Sky? I mean, is that something that's come up on the radar? I mean, you've mentioned Burberry, BMW, others. Would you agree with Sky?
I know of that Sky example. For me, at the end of the day, it comes down to gaining a consumer insight, deeply understanding something about the consumer. Everything else is chasing fool's gold, in my opinion. Technology companies pile themselves into this business, and they all want to integrate big data. You know, this is a nice challenge, but a lot of data I don't need to know. So the question for the strategist, for the business is, how do you tap into data, the limited amount of data, the limited amount of time we have, in order to extract an insight? I think this is where the premium is. That always has been the premium. I think we lose ourselves in the data, in the big data conversation. Obviously, a large technology company cannot make money on insights. But the industry, creativity, advertising is built, branding is built on insights, on understanding demand opportunities. And so I think that rather than sort of like trying to integrate everything and optimizing merely what we have done already optimized for all these years, I think we ought to just focus on the front end and says, how do we drive our strategies through an insight? And that's, to me, is a challenge. And that requires not a mindset of a year or 3 months or a campaign mindset. That requires an always-on mindset. And therein lies the data. They are available, they are daily available, they are always on. That's, to me, so it's not about the size of the data, the many data. Now, theoretically, that's a very interesting challenge, but it's about getting the data at the right time. Most of the data is irrelevant tomorrow. Okay. What is created today?
I think
that's very interesting. Just from a perspective of a entrepreneur on the cutting edge of innovation, what's your view on that?
Well, I think it's interesting because we've touched on the point of the volume of data, and the growth of this data is so exponential. I think for me it begins with, what are you trying to learn from the data? So all good data should begin with a question, and then you use the data to go and answer it. So you talk about the idea of 5% gets used well. But if that's the 5% of data that's relevant, then great.
Okay.
Because you can answer the question that you're trying to achieve on the back of that subset, then actually you've got efficiencies at that stage.
But do you need to research the 100% to find the 5%, or
not necessarily, because coming from the context of premium publishing and content-based websites, you're often segmenting your audience to the point that you're actually looking for very specific factors that indicate a user is part of a subset. At that point, you've got your value from a very small chunk of data comparative to this great big data pie.
Okay.
And you can extract so much data from a web page, from a user, and God, we do. You know, we've got a 97-point algorithm alone just looking at the context of a page and the user looking at it. But do we need to use all 97 points all the time? No, because it comes back to the real time, the speed, the latency, the effectiveness. And when you start using more data than you need, then at that point, I think you're actually getting into diseconomies. Okay.
Well, let's just actually go into that in a bit more depth. I mean, from everybody's perception of data is that there's no emotion in data. Data is hard fact. And so the people who work with data are purely rational in trying to, in a sterilized way, trying to engage the customer, trying to find the right point to talk to the customer. What's your perspective, Mark, in terms of the essence of data in actually contributing towards emotion? I was thinking, for example, earlier on, the image of the Harley Davidson, would that have been created had the people who created it gone through reams and reams of research data? Maybe yes, maybe no. What's your perspective on that? Can we actually identify that brand emotion or develop that brand emotion by using data?
I think marketing's always been a combination of art and science, and it always will be. Okay. It's using data to understand more about consumers, so consumer insight, asking the right questions. But ultimately, there's still going to have to be creativity. There's still that generating the idea, ideally based on an insight, but then using whether it's engagement or some other metric to identify potentially pieces of creativity and content which really resonate with consumers and really amplifying them. So reaching a much bigger audience. Whether that's internationally, whether that's very targeted to specific communities, with that creative.
Okay. And achieving that quickly as well. I'd say. I mean, the importance of real time, of A/B testing in real time. and then getting the insight on the actual effectiveness of your creative, and then using data to place that actual creative better.
Okay. So, Eric, does data drive creativity, or does creativity drive the data?
I think data drives creativity. If you have Facebook data, you have a social graph. And what happens is that when you go online, and if you look at a dashboard and look at the typical sort of like dashboards that are produced today, then you totally miss the point, because then you're in the averaging out of the creativity. But if you literally start this and take this as a starting point, and you go to actual conversations, you will find a lot of insights. You will actually online, people express themselves in so many ways, leaving musings or conversations, and you sort of find real nuggets of insights that you naturally would have to sit in a focus group or in sort of ethnography. So I think it's actually a rich data source. The question is how you use the data. Not as a dashboard, not as a metric, not in terms of sentiments, but in terms of literally digging deep into some of the natural expressions that consumers leave online. And I think that's where the richness
you're immersing yourself in the data, you're smelling the data, so to speak.
Exactly.
In a way. Okay.
One of the things here is about finding the effective way to use the data for your business, right? So as a brand, do you care about how the actual transaction on that buy happens? No. Me as an ex-media buyer and as a media seller, do I care about the transactional side? Very much so, right? Because that actually is where I can be efficient. It's where I can use the data that's generated to infer effective changes for both sides. I can decide to make more money and lower a price. I can decide to make more money by raising a price. I can use data to infer that type of decisioning. So that transactional data becomes much more important. Sorry, transactional in media data, just to be clear, becomes much more important for your agent. One of the things that I do think becomes important from a marketing perspective is trying to unify as much of your data as you can, and that is using a whole cluster of potential companies or services to do that, and then working out how you action that. One of the significant opportunities that we get by using that insight to create an effective campaign is then being able to use elements of that insight to target that campaign effectively again.
Okay.
But also is around making certain that you're not limiting serendipity, right?
Okay.
Because you can drive yourself down a loop by just retargeting is an incredibly powerful technology.
Yep.
But it can also lead you down one funnel. If you're not replenishing the funnel, if you don't replenish the funnel, you get to a decreasing circle.
Okay. Let's just jump to the side a bit before we actually continue down that route in terms of different technologies that are influencing big data. So obviously mobile phone is a big thing. From your perspective, Simon, you guys have bought what probably still is the largest handset manufacturer in the world. I don't know, or maybe the second now, I don't know.
But, I wouldn't like to comment. We're in the process of buying, just to be very precise.
Okay.
But that's an interesting play for us.
Yeah. So obviously there's a plan behind that. But so where do you see the increased benefits? Obviously, more people are using mobile phones, and there's more information coming from that. Is that going to overwhelm us, or are we going to be able to use that more effectively to achieve serendipity in the cases where we need to, or targeting in the right time when we need to?
So mobile is just a massive signal creator, right? I don't know how many people in the audience have used their mobile phone today, right? I would guess 100%.
Yep.
Well, there's no signal in here, so it's...
Okay. On their way to today, how many people... And then how many people have used it for email and web browsing, right? Hands, roughly? 60, 70% of people?
At least, yeah.
Right? And then there's people with location on, location not on. So there's a whole range of different signals being passed just into this room. That data is valuable, but is it actionable? Okay.
That's the question.
Or in what context?
And actually, also, do you want all of it to be actionable as a consumer? And that's why in all of your use of data, you have to consider your relationship with the consumer and your permission to use that data.
Okay, Eric.
I think that what's important is with mobile is that before mobile, data was generated on social media, on digital browsing behaviors and things like that. But with mobile, we add one component that is critical for consumption, and that is context. when you add to all these conversations and all these big data, when you add context, namely where consumers are when they express a thought, then you have a real powerful database, in my opinion. So that adding that contextual information, where you are, when you sort of say something, or how do you shop, and these paths to purchases, if you will. That's what mobile adds to, if you will, to big data. That's what the trick is, context.
Okay, and Mike, you mentioned before the real-time factor. How does that play into this?
In the mobile space?
In the mobile space, yeah.
Well, I think the real-time factor in this whole data game is absolutely critical. Certainly from our point of view, we're trying to analyse the context of pages in real time. And a page that's been created with one context, say an editorial review, if it's got a comment field on the bottom of the page, that context can be changing in real time. So an article that can begin very brand safe, kind of a good advertising environment, can quickly degenerate, if you like, for want of a better word, into a brand unsafe environment, and we've got to be picking that up in real time. You've got the latency factor, obviously Simon and the exchanges on Microsoft side, and we've also got the exchange on the PowerLink side, and the speed of data crunching to avoid any sort of latency, and the placement in real time is critical. And then, you know, the idea of putting in more data from the likes of mobile, the context, the geolocation, the sheer volume of touch points that you've got with the mobile device. You know, the latest research indicates that the average person will touch or engage with their smartphone around 100 times a day. Like flick it on, check for emails, check for SMS, check for whatever you're looking for, and making that actionable, but at the right time. So going back to the idea on question 1 around, is it a data point that we need to use for this question that we're trying to answer?
Yep.
So, and that'll come back to what type of ad we're trying to serve, what the actual KPIs of that are, what the metrics are.
Okay, and going over to Facebook, obviously one of probably the most used apps on mobile. Can you share with us what percentage of data that you analyze is mobile related versus other forms of data?
Yeah, I think increasingly mobile, like whether it's mobile, desktop, the notion of thinking about devices is almost irrelevant. It's more about people.
Okay.
It's, it's everyone. Marketers talk to people.
Right.
They don't talk to a mobile phone or a desktop.
Okay.
So it's really, I think for us, we've got 20 million daily active users in the UK on mobile. And it's really kind of ensuring that there's whatever device they access Facebook from, there's a consistent way that they see the stuff from their friends, from the brands they like, to really really make sure that. So I've lost my train of thought now. I mean, it's important to understand that where they're accessing it from, to make sure that as a brand you're communicating with them in the thing they're using.
But obviously you have far richer data from your mobile users than you do from your non-mobile users because of the contextualization of it, or is that not the case? Am I wrong there?
I mean, I think it's still early days. I mean, I think the key thing that mobile gives you is potentially location as an additional field. Yeah. And I think it was still early days as an advertising industry and understanding fully what location context really means. Okay. Now, going on to the next step from mobile, we were talking about, or we heard about the Google Glass before. That's sort of maybe the next stage. Can any of you, I'll throw the question open, any of you maybe speculate the new opportunities that can be gained out of that? I'm sure there are obviously lots of opportunities for Google, but I'm talking about the rest of the industry.
So, I actually think that, I personally cannot get comfortable with Google Glass. Okay. I just can't, and for some reasons, I feel alone there by myself, and seeing people wearing Google Glass or being in a conversation while wearing a Google Glass. I never know whether they have attention to me or to whatever they watch on Google Glass. So I think that there is a and people always say, Eric, you have to get comfortable with it, and I don't know whether that's true. I actually think that there is a real movement toward wearable technologies, the quantified self movement. So that'll extend and that'll grow in significant ways. But I think that Google Glass is a moonshot, you know, just like many other things that we see from Google, and I think it's over the top. So I don't necessarily, somebody needs to prove to me how really Google Glass, you know, deserves the conversation it does, other than that it's just something extremely geeky. Right. That's my point.
So, well, but the thing, the point I accept that for many people, including obviously yourself, as a consumer, you might think that's a step too far. But let's just assume it is successful. It may or may not be, obviously. What opportunities can we see from an advertising perspective with such a possibly an additional amount of data flowing from that? Or is it too personal and it's not going to be, we're not going to see the benefit from it in terms of an advertising perspective?
So wearable technology is incredibly nascent, right?
Yeah.
And we should actually be fair, very fair in this conversation. That's an experiment, and it's a way to say, is this a form factor that will work? Will it work? What are the problems?
Yep.
Some people will like it, some people won't. Samsung's Gear, sorry, I forgot the name, smartwatch is just coming out.
Yep.
There's the Pebble smartwatch that was crowdsourced last year. There's a number of smartwatches that will come. There are clear opportunities for increased personalized technology. I think it was Steve who gave the example of medical care being provided by a chip.
Yep.
Right? So there's huge advancement there and huge opportunity. How much opportunity for advertising? That's where you have to be really difficult on. That's where you have to be really careful on that. What's private and personal.
Okay.
So
totally
you can infer data that you can use in your campaigns about that person. Potentially, and this is all potentially. Does that mean you want to use it in that moment? If I'm using Google Gear, just as if I'm using, using Samsung Gear, I'll get there in the end. If I'm having a conversation on my wristwatch, which is one of those apps, do I want to have an advertising message at that point? I don't know.
But you see, all of those examples are devices that are engaging the brand that has conceived them with the consumer, like the Nike one, which obviously is very successful. Is there a potential, for example, for a Facebook device that might become a platform for many different companies to share in that engagement with the consumer? Is that something that has been thought of?
I think our approach has been, at the moment at least, has been to build apps for Android, for iPhone, and so on. And it's really, I think it's, kind of from our perspective, we can reach a lot more people by doing that. Who knows where in 5 years' time, what devices will be available and how people use them. I think that social layer, whether it's on top of Nike Plus and the Fuel Band, and being able to share stories with your friends, we're social animals, so that's that ability to do that will always be there. Where different companies work in creating devices versus building for those devices, I think that's still to be determined.
So it's still, the jury's out on that one. Okay, let's just go a bit to metrics. In terms of metrics, Mike, obviously there's a spew of metrics coming out now, and really the question is, again, as with looking at what is the right data, what is looking at the right metrics. How do you see that trend becoming more manageable?
I suppose, it's a wonderful time with this idea of will Google Glass become an advertising platform? Because the age-old standard of measuring click-through rates obviously isn't going to work too well in wearable technology in that sense. And you're reading rumours of paper gaze and potentially kind of whole new kind of metrics coming out based around that. And I think what the industry needs more than anything is a device agnostic measurement platform that will work in a digital environment.
Okay.
And you maybe look at the benefits that traditional media like the TVs have had from metrics that they can stand behind as an industry. And I don't think digital's quite got there yet. I think it's, so often we're measuring brand-orientated campaigns with metrics which are orientated around direct response. So measuring a brand campaign by the number of clicks it drives. If it's, say, a video, for argument's sake, can be a nearly useless kind of correlation.
I agree. I mean, I think both ComScore and Nielsen, the big players in measurement generally, tend to both be focusing on, bringing that online currency with either Campaign Essentials or OCR, different products at the moment, but really focusing on reach and frequency as key metrics, just as they've always been for TV, increasing, to be able to get that comparability, whether it's across different digital sites, and also through to different channels.
Particularly when you consider the idea of YouTube kind of video ads turning up on the TV with the Chromecast, and all these different devices and all these different ways of consuming media, and the increasingly blurred definition between what is TV advertising of old and what is digital advertising, and where those budgets sit and how you measure them, how you compare them, how you can get that measurability in this device agnostic way is the critical next step now for me.
Yeah, the only thing, one point I wanted to make, and maybe you can comment on that, is we seem to have a double standard on metrics, in that we say that the metrics in the online world are not perfect, and we're not happy with them, and I would quite agree with that. But if you look at the metrics which are being used for traditional media, I would say the ones in the online world are far more, let's say, shall we say, objective, or at least that would be my perspective. And so really I would say that it's in the traditional world where probably we need to make great strides in terms of improving the metrics. Any perspective on that?
There's just a couple of things with that. One, I think what's the appropriate metric is an individual brand/advertiser conversation, right? And it depends what they're trying to achieve.
Right.
For some that are, DR orientated or response oriented or pure sales orientated, understanding the path through that conversion is important. But it is looking at the whole path of that conversion. It's understanding where contact was had, was it seen, did it have an influence? Okay. So there are some metrics. We're not going to go back and change how TV is measured. We will change how future forms of TV are measured. Damon spoke well to YouTube as a distribution channel that is trackable in a different way, but it predominantly won't be worth the investment in time to go back, both recreate, rewrite panels in any way to be effective, but also start to employ delivery systems that mean you could start to personalise advertising more. What will happen is, over a longer period, consumption of content will change device. That will then change the metrics that are applied.
Okay.
That's my personal belief.
Yep. Eric, if you had a wish from the data guys in order to improve the quality, the usefulness of data, and we're kind of getting into the last few minutes here of the discussion, what would be your advice to us data guys that we need to spend most of our time on researching and improving?
I think that right now we live in a world where every network, so whether it's Facebook or it's Pinterest or whatever, develops their own metrics, their own dashboards, and we sort of like lose ourselves in a metrics world. And I think that at the end of the day, it comes down to one metric, and that is preference. Do I prefer this brand over that brand? Brand preference, consideration, brand preference. That's what really matters. I don't want to hear about earned media and your definition of earned media. I don't want to hear about your owned media and all the talk about amplification. Forget it. What I really care about is how does that drive preference? And I think we are at the point where today where we can do that. We have great experience at our company with Facebook, with the search engines here, and to actually make that happen and create the link. So, but rather than talking about means, earned media, owned media, and all sort of shared media is all means. 1 billion likes is, or 1 billion likes or 1 billion views means nothing. We need to make that translation to preference. That's what it really comes down to. At the end of the day, it comes down to consumers at the end of the day. And that's about preference toward your brand.
Okay, Mark, what would you need?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think there's two sides to it. There's the outcome, what we call outcome metrics, the brand preferences, the sales of the world, and making them as comparable across channels as possible, so that how you, speaking with a media agency hat on, knowing whether you should do more of TV or less of TV, more of radio or less of radio. That's the one side, and then the other side is what are the good proxies in the short and medium term for that outcome. So what are those metrics to look at today and tomorrow, and it's figuring out which ones matter. and really focusing on those rather than the signal from the noise.
Okay, the signal from the noise. So that's the important message there. With that, we've actually run out of time. I mean, I had a load more questions, and we could have spent probably an hour here, but you probably all would have wanted to go to sleep then by that time. So I hope it was interesting enough anyway. And from our perspective, speaking as a data guy, we look forward to all this additional data coming on board and being able to use it at least a bit. Thank you very much.